bring it on home with our second panel. We have today 4 wonderful school administrators who are going to talk about the impact of Brown and how our Texas schools are faced with the DEI challenges that are going on in our state right now. And so, and how the removal of DEI programs have impacted our Texas public schools. The first person I want to introduce on this panel is Ms. Candace Hunter. She is one of the Austin Independent School District board members. What I love about this that she has in her bio is that she's 3rd generation East Austinite. You don't see that very often these days, and I love it. I love it. Ms. Hunter is also she's currently on the board of trustees, but she's also a school administrator in Austin ISD and has been formerly a teacher in the district. Our second panelist is Chandra Villanueva. Hope I got that right. Director of Policy and Advocacy at Every Texan, which is formerly the Center for Public Policy Priorities. A lot of P's there.
That's why we changed our name.
I totally see that. Chandra oversees Every Texan's policy and advocacy work, and she joined the organization in 2010, and she comes to us today with a lot of this information from a community perspective as it relates to DEI in our school districts in public education. The next person on our panel is Ms. Karen Gray. Ms. Karen Gray is the Interim Chief of Access and Opportunity with the Round Rock Independent School District. I met Ms. Karen about 6 months ago. I attended, they had a summit of on Black education, and it's actually a second part 2 going on today. Part three going on today. That she left that event to come over here. Did you also? And so they've had a very busy day today, but it was when I met Karen, I'm sorry, she was actually the DEI. That was on her business card, and we kind of touched on how is that role changing with all of the new laws that had recently been passed in the state of Texas, and I hope she offers some insight on that this afternoon. Thank you for coming, Karen. And then last but not least, and we've already heard from Dr. Joseph, who gave us this fiery presentation earlier about the Brown case, who's a professor at UT Austin. One cool thing about Dr. Joseph is, did you bring your books today?
Oh, I just brought 2 of them just so people could see.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I thought he was going to bring some books for us to be able to purchase today.
Yeah.
But he is also behind the Nat Geo, Disney Plus, and Hulu 8-part series MLK and Malcolm X. And so if you get a chance, check that out. It's based on a book that he wrote, and it's an 8-part series that you can go and watch this weekend if you have time. So thank you all for coming out this afternoon, and we're just going to jump right into our panel introductions and questions for the afternoon. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Awesome. So we're going to get started. I'd like you to just give us, we've talked about names, your title, and a brief description of your current role as it relates to public education. Please include your professional, personal experiences as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we'll start with Candace.
Okay, as you said before, I'm a current sitting board member for Austin ISD, but I'm also coordinator of residency at ACC for alternative certification. So if you can kind of think about what a resident doctor would do, that's what our resident teachers do. They're in the classroom practicing before they are certified. And so I oversee that program. I'm so sorry, what was the rest of your question?
Your current role and your professional experience as it relates to DEI.
So if you're familiar with Austin ISD, we, and first at the outset, let me say I'm speaking for myself. I cannot speak for a 9-member board nor the superintendent. And a disclaimer, yeah. I literally have to do that. And so I believe that that the Austin ISD school board, one of the things that we do is we want every child to be seen. We are really good at that being our focus. As far as diversity and inclusion, we're there. when we get more deeper into questions about Brown, we are still missing the mark when it comes to students with, who receive special education services, African American students, and our most marginalized communities. So we are still missing the mark there. My work, the class that I actually teach at ACC is bilingual and ESL education. And so I get to spend a lot of time helping novice teachers and pre-service teachers really get ready for that piece that's going to be so important that's already missing. So we talk a lot about Nicholas V. Lau, when the Chinese students in San Francisco aren't being taught in their native language and bilingual education. We're going to get into Plyer v. Doe, saying whether a child is documented or not, they're in our schools, and no, you can't charge them a fee. So those are the kinds of things. That's my role right now as being a board member. I'm also on the policy committee and making sure that those policies actually match the vision of the board. And so, yeah, that's mine when it comes to DEI.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Chandra.
All right, thank you for having me here today. I'm not sure if this works. Okay, great. So my name is Chandra Villanueva. I am with Every Texan, and we are a public policy organization where we really believe that social justice requires public policy. So I spend a lot of my time at the Capitol defending the rights of all students and fighting for equity within our public education system. I also spend a lot of time of trying to build context around where we are today with the history that we've seen before. So I definitely appreciated your remarks, Dr. Joseph. And, you know, I think it's really important to remember that public education is not something Texas has ever been good at or was ever necessarily interested in throughout the history of our state. We didn't even really have a public education system that even closely resembles what we have today until way past Reconstruction. And the very first time we even started really thinking about public education and forming it before the Civil War was because there was concerns that our students were being sent north to get an education, and we were bringing teachers from the north in, and with that was bringing anti-slavery propaganda. And that is why Texas even started thinking about public education and failed miserably over and over and over again until way past Reconstruction. So I really, I think it's great to bring the history into this. All of the things that happened in the past are very reflective of what we're experiencing today. And I'm sure there'll be more examples to talk about throughout this conversation.
Thank you for the work that you do. Karen?
All right, testing. Is that on? Yeah. There we go. Thank you. I'm excited to be here. My name's Karen Gray. I currently serve as the Chief of Access and Opportunity for Round Rock ISD. Prior to that, I was a social studies teacher, so making sure that my students knew the history in class. That wasn't something I received growing up in a small town where not a lot of people looked like me or saw my own differences as a positive. So China, Texas, most people don't know where that is. Beaumont is where that is close to. So that really sparked my engagement to get involved in education. Once I was in education, I moved up into administration, but seeing that we were pushing out students who looked like me, the disproportionality in discipline, academic achievement gaps, all of those things were tugging at my heartstrings. And so in 2019, I actually stepped outside of the system to really do more community work and understand the problem from a different lens. I started MK Results LLC, authored a book, The Road to Equity, the 5 C's to construct an equitable classroom, and had been doing work with just organizations, school districts, training on many of the concepts of understanding ourselves and doing some inner work, because our own backgrounds, lived experiences impact how we show up and engage, especially teachers and being in the classroom. And so from that work, I worked in HR around DEI, looking at retention for our Black and Brown teachers, making sure campuses had representation. And then now I'm in Round Rock ISD. It was the Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Department, of course, with Senate Bill 17 being proactive. And I applaud Round Rock ISD for continuing to invest in the office to make sure that we were taking care of our students and doing what is best. One of our goals is making sure that we are bold in how we interact and support the needs of all students, but through dignity, making sure that that is the foundation of ensuring that every student, regardless of their background, new to the country, that they have that dignity that they deserve, and their families as well. So again, my current role is about creating that access and opportunities for students, but also looking at systemic barriers that impede them from being successful. So we don't want their identity to be a predictor of success or failure within our system. So excited to be here.
Oh, that's great, thank you. Yeah, so I don't know, can people hear me? Yeah. So I'm the Barbara Jordan Chair in Ethics and Political Values at the LWVAA School of Public Affairs. I'm also the founding director for the Center of the Study of Race and Democracy, and also a distinguished service leadership professor and professor of history at the University of Texas at Austin. I was associate dean for 2 years of Justice, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion that was shuttered by SB 17, and then I had another role as associate dean of faculty mentoring that was shuttered as part of compliance, which I would say is racist compliance as part of SB 17. But the roles that I've played besides being a scholar and a researcher and a teacher in terms of DEI was to try to bring in more students and faculty, alumni of color to the University of Texas and on the 40 acres and try to push back against a really long racist history of the University of Texas, founded in 1883 as a segregated school, right? And those juxtapositions, they're not paradoxes. We see the black athletes that University of Texas has, but University of Texas doesn't love black people, right? But they will definitely continue to super exploit black athletes and whoever's black on campus who they can super exploit. So one thing that we haven't said in terms of Brown and the 70th anniversary is that when you have the anti-DEI laws in Texas and Florida and the Stop Woke Acts, this is very, very similar and a parallel to the Black Codes. This is very similar and a parallel to fugitive slave laws, where there are certain states that you can talk about DEI like California and New York. So those are the free states. There are slave states. Texas is one of them, and Texas was always the biggest slave state in American history once it joins the Union, right? After the so-called Mexican-American War of 1841 to 1845, the Republic of Texas, right? So Texas is an extraordinarily morally reprehensible place and politically indefensible, right? And saying that people shouldn't be scared to say it, but SB 17 is designed to make people scared to say it, right? So all of us who are alive and presumably think of ourselves as people of goodwill and people who have some kind of courage have to understand what's happening morally in the United States, but especially in Texas, right? So there are the most black people live in Texas, 4 million, than any other state. Not by percentage, but by aggregate. By percentage, it's Mississippi. And I just finished talking to somebody from Oxford, Mississippi, Dr. Baker's wife. When we think about what's going on here, they've normalized the anti-DEI, anti-affirmative action, the idea of saying the Vice President of the United States is a DEI candidate. This is all morally reprehensible. So we are facing an onslaught from moral monsters. By moral monsters, I mean people who don't respect the dignity and the humanity of anyone, including children, including women, and they especially don't believe in God because Christian nationalism is not religion. It's a cult, okay? It's a cult. And so the last thing I'll say is that we have to acknowledge where we're at. All the people who tell me, I meet people all the time because I give thousands of lectures, so I meet tens of thousands of people in my travel. They say they love history and they love Lincoln or George Washington, especially the white folks love the presidents. They love them, you know what I mean? Black people will talk to me about Fannie Lou Hamer or different stuff. White people, it's always the presidents. The presidents are better than Jesus for most of the white people who I meet. They don't talk about Jesus, they talk about Washington and Lincoln and Jefferson, right? We are living in existentially dangerous times because we are living in a time where people are saying we have to ban American history, right? And the reason they're saying they want American history is banned is so that they can continue an onslaught of reproductive injustice, right? Economic injustice, anti-black racism, immigration, xenophobia in terms of anti-immigrants, anti-Semitism, but also Islamophobia and anti-Palestinian sentiment. And certainly the queerphobia, the transphobia, the homophobia, that's all there, right? But the linchpin of this is otherizing anybody who believes in dignity and saying that they are not qualified, that they're a diversity candidate, they're an affirmative action candidate, and we have to understand the parallels between what's going on right now and what happened right after the Civil War that got us in this mess anyway, And this was connected to voting rights because right after the Civil War, what people said is when Republicans won in that era, the Republicans are progressive. I want everybody to understand. The party of Lincoln and Frederick Douglass is the Republican Party. They said the Republicans cheated. That's what they said. They said the Republicans cheated in South Carolina, in New Orleans, in Alabama. There were racial pogroms against black people there, right? Starting in 1866, during Reconstruction, right? And so by the time you've got people in 2024 saying they won't acknowledge an election, just like January 6th was connected to insurrections and connected to racial violence that went all the way back to the 1860s and the 1870s and the 1880s and the 1890s, we are living through the same times, right? And so the reason why we don't want to acknowledge this is because the Confederacy, which is alive and well in 2024, right here in Texas and throughout the whole South, was always about authoritarian fascism. In 1865 it was, and in 2024, and what we've allowed as a society is for morally reprehensible people to be in charge of our lives.
That was wonderful. And that leads into my next question for the panel. What do you think we as citizens can do to depoliticize this issue and place us back on a path of equity and justice and social progress for everyone? And it's no particular order. Just jump in with your response.
I mean, I can start. Elections have consequences. I mean, we're here with the League of Women Voters. Like, we need to vote. You need to inform your neighbors on what's happening. This is just the continuation of the legacy of white supremacy, not just in the state of Texas, but in the country as a whole. And the only way to fight back is to reclaim our democracy and vote for the candidates that actually support democracy, that support diversity, equity, inclusion, and dignity. I mean, it really is. Like, it's come down to that's the first and most powerful thing we can do is to vote, educate our neighbors, make sure they vote, because elections, they have consequences.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
I don't know that there's any action we can do to depoliticize it, because that's the power behind it, right? I will share my story. I am also a history teacher, and I taught in East Austin at Webb, Dobie, Martin, Reagan, but I taught U.S. history from 1492 to Reconstruction. So I'm teaching this course to mostly immigrant and black and native-born brown children. And I did that for about 10 years. And then I actually had to decolonize my teaching. And I realized one day I was saying we and us. I was like, wait, no, not me. I was definitely not included in that. And what I had to look at is I was perpetuating the story that I had been told, right? That I didn't even understand that there were like our heroes, right? So my mom is an Anderson Yellow Jacket. And she tells me that all the stories about that in the community, and we look at those people and we see all of these doctors and lawyers and engineers and all of these people, and then we look at AISD, and 13% of children by grade 3 that are African American are on reading level, and 9% are on math or on level. Yeah. That's wrong. There's something wrong with that. Yeah. So as far as depoliticizing it, I have no cure or answer, silver bullet for that. But what I do know is when I look at education, there's something fundamentally wrong when we create other than. When we have children who, when I speak to them, and as we are going into, some of the board members and I are going into another school this year, but when we sit down and talk to students and they feel like they don't belong in their own school, our magnet programs are done very poorly. Someone was talking about when Keeling was first established. That was supposed to bring people, like the best in that community, to that school. The majority of those kids live, and nothing wrong with Circle C or 4 Points, but the majority of kids are driving miles. And the kids who live in that community, in the same building, the principal there has worked hard to bring that back, but it has been 2 schools. It was literally at one point an upstairs and a downstairs at that school.
Well, the same thing was with LBJ.
Was with LBJ until that particular board said, we give in, you can have your own building. And I'm gonna move on from that.
That's awesome.
But there has to be accountability for what's happening with our children. If you go back and watch the board, I said, I'm not gonna sit here, meeting after meeting after meeting, and you tell me that black children are failing, because they're not, we are failing them.
Yeah.
And if every meeting you're telling me the same thing, then what you're doing is not working.
Yeah.
And so for me, the thing we have to do is, first of all, I heard a child say it this morning at the State of Black Education 3, stop brushing it under the rug.
Yeah.
That was a 7th grader that said that.
Yeah.
A 12th grader from Leander said, why isn't, you made these promises that it's gonna be different when I was in 9th grade. Here I am graduating as senior, it's actually worse than it was.
Yeah.
The identity bullying and that sort of thing that's happening. So depoliticizing, I can't do it, but it's saying it out loud. It's holding ourselves to a higher standard. I also wanna say that I understand that black families in Austin are tired. My inbox should be full every day saying, you people are not doing what you're doing, and it's not. It's not. Because, and I told the superintendent this, I said, that's because they believe that if you send your children to AISD, they don't care about us, and the only reason I'm here is because I can't get out.
Yeah.
I'm locked in this apartment, I'm locked in this home.
Yeah.
That's an indictment of us.
Yeah.
And so, as we move forward, and as we, like I said, we are really good at saying, we want you here, you're included, we have a pride parade, we do all of these wonderful things, we have a great, we raise the Pan-African flag, we do all of those things. But what matters is for those children and the outcomes for their lives, because right now, their skin color is determining their future.
Yeah.
And that means that we are a lot closer to 1954 than we are 2024.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, absolutely. Yep, absolutely.
Testing? Okay. I would say to counter fear, we have to educate and have conversations with people and mobilize, but also organize in a way that we're able to be reactive, but also proactive to what's happening against us. Identity-based bullying has been an issue. We see that in our schools. And now we're doing something about it. For Round Rock ISD, we're the first district and only district in the state of Texas to add to our bullying policy identity-based bullying, so that we can track it by race, by gender identity, by religion. So we have not only the data to also support why we're doing this and the impact it is on vulnerable communities, those who have been historically marginalized. We can't sit back and wait for somebody else. We have to save ourselves. And so as we connect with organizations, internal but also external, listening to their voices and inviting them to the table, because they're closest to the problem. So how can we be partners in this? When we look at some of our data just across the state, we see the disproportionality in discipline. Many of the things that were in Brown versus Board, they're still what we're fighting against today.
Yeah.
Schools are even more now segregated.
Yeah.
We still have people saying this side of the track and that side of the track, and it's 2024. So how we depoliticize this is, of course, we need to vote and move and make sure, because we're having our daughters go into spaces where they will have less rights than we have. And if we don't really come together, and that's even cross districts, communities, inviting people to the table, we're going to continue having some of the same issues. We have to also be holding our leaders accountable for what they're saying when we elect people into office, but also two-way communication with public education so that we can better understand the needs of the community, to be proactive and inviting them to a welcoming space. As students go through any public education system, we also see the sense of belonging for our students sharply declines in middle and high school. And why is that, right? That as they get older, they're feeling less connected. In the panel earlier, our students were saying, there's nobody who looks like us. Even in administration, teachers, there's not a space, and they're having to go outside of the school to have their identities affirmed. Traditionally, schools are the place where community is built, where people come together, where we support one another, find the resources, and especially the equity piece on understanding what each person needs is going to look different. How each person learns looks different. But we also have to examine some of the policies that have been in place that have been counterproductive to some of our goals. We may create all these wonderful goals, but if we aren't looking at some of the policies and practices that are still harming our Black and brown students, then we aren't really doing our job either. So I invite more people to be part of the conversation with education, because school board elections matter, local politics matter. They directly impact us way more than some of the national things, but we also have to show up in numbers to make sure that we're early voting, that we are practicing using our voice, because we see that even now we have people being purged from the voting polls, right? And that's another tactic. So we also have to be strategic in how we are making sure we meet people where they are to make sure they are registered to vote, but that their voice is heard, because we don't know until we don't know. And we can't wait for the data to keep telling us what we already keep seeing over and over again. It's time to act, and we act by countering that fear with education and using that four-letter word, voting.
I heard vote, mobilize, organize. Those are my three
Well,
takeaways.
very, very quickly, I think in terms of policies, though, one of the things we have to remember is that we've had a lot of difficult losses over the last several decades in terms of voter education and voter access. So what we need to do, especially where Shelby v. Holder is concerned, and then Texas with the gerrymandering, and really it's so difficult to register to vote in Texas. October 7th is the last day you can register. We actually do need a both-and strategy where we are trying to end gerrymandering in Texas, but that if there is a Kamala Harris, Tim Walz administration, and if they have a Senate and they have a Congress House of Representatives, on day one, that they passed the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and there was another part of, there were two voting rights bills when Biden first got into office, and one of them was going to greatly expand voter access and regularize voter access at the federal level. So this is things like registering every senior in high school across the country. This is things like making sure that we could have same day registration every election. This is things like making the United States at the federal level give us support for a voting holiday, which includes child care and elder care, right? So there's a lot that we should be doing. When you say nonpartisan, one of the things that we could do in a nonpartisan way to remake up the maps in every single state is to have a commission that includes people who are independents, people who are Republicans, and people who are Democrats all together, maybe a number of 15, and we do the maps that way. Certainly we use, we have technological help, but we do maps that are non-discriminatory maps. But like, you know, a couple of things that I'm hearing here that have been talked about. One, in terms of representation matters. So even if we had a non-gerrymandered House of Representatives, we still need to make sure that women, Native American, Black, queer, and other people are represented in the House of Representatives and in the U.S. Senate. So the idea of representation is very, very important. Jewish, Muslim, Palestinian, we need all of it. Like the Democratic Convention just had a convention, they wouldn't let a Palestinian speaker speak. That, I have to tell everybody, is insanity. You can't say you have a big tent and you've got Leon Panetta and the CIA speaking, and you can't have a Palestinian who's just going to talk about human rights. Not throw Kamala under the bus. She can't talk about human rights. What kind of world are we living in if you can't just talk about human rights? That's going to offend people, right? So we need a much bigger tent, and we actually have to think policy-wise of how we can get there, right? And in terms of Texas, very, very difficult. University of Texas is basically under threat every other year by the ledge, right? So these are very, very difficult conversations, and the governor currently is redistributing money that they get through our property taxes, because there's no state taxes. So those of us who live in Hyde Park or Tarrytown or wherever, that's the money they're using, but using it for private school schemes, to take it away from AISD, to take it away from Round Rock ISD, to take it away from public schools, and that's never a good deal, right? And so a lot of this is that even those people who are part of League of Women Voters, I would challenge groups like this too, because so many people are fine doing what they do as long as they have their privilege. Because everybody here knows what their 401k account is. I know mine too. Because I'm a dad, right? But if you're fine with your 8 or 10 or 15 million dollars, right? As long as your kids don't go to school with any black people, right? And I'm not talking about this group, I'm talking about in general. Even people, they're putting up the Harris Wall signs, and it's all good as long as it doesn't collapse in on them. And collapse in on them, the data, we have it. White people leave neighborhoods when they can if it's more than 8% black. If more than 8% black people are in the neighborhood, they leave. We've got the data. Right? And so these are just facts. So even people who want to claim they're on the right side, a lot of times they're not unless it's convenient for them, right? So this is all very, very difficult stuff, right? But again, I'm an old church boy, New Bethel Baptist Church, New York, and we told the truth. And the truth, we weren't struck by lightning once we told the truth. But the truth was also very uncomfortable for people to hear. People didn't want to hear the truth, right? People wanted to go to heaven, but they didn't want to die, right? They didn't want to hear the truth, right? And so part of what we have to do in that nonpartisan way is how can we set up where every single person in Texas who's an eligible citizen can actually vote, right? How can we end 1 million people being snatched off the voting rolls since last November? How can we have same-day voter registration? But not just that, how can we set it up where the Texas State Ledge can't ban any of our speech, whether we are for reproductive justice or we're against it? Anybody. We don't want, one last anecdote. March on Washington, August 28, 1963. At that march, there were news cameras interviewing civil rights activists. Across from the march was the American Nazi Party, George Lincoln Rockwell. They were there. They got kicked out a little bit later because they tried to speak on a bullhorn and didn't have permission, but they were there. They asked black civil rights leaders, what do you think of the American Nazis marching across the street? The leaders said, we don't agree with what they have to say, but we respect their right to march. This is 1963. No Civil Rights Act has been passed. No Voting Rights Act has been passed. They said they respected their right to march because they knew if you could tell them to stop, you could tell us to stop, right? So the whole thing has to be, we can't cherry pick. We can't just say we're for our favorite subjects and our favorite issues, and the people who we disagree with, throw them out, right? We can't do that. We actually need more speech, not less speech, just like we need more reproductive justice, not less. We need our young people, whether they're queer or straight, to be able to have their journey and to support them, not less, right? And not to say, if your kid is saying, hey, this is where I'm at, not to say that the public school has somehow done mind control and done this to them. That's not how it works, right? So we need more freedoms, not less.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Thank you. I do want to open up a Q&A for the audience and have it, for the next question, it's a two-part question. Take a minute or two we've talked about all the challenges, a lot of the challenges during this discussion. I want us to address one thing that is going well in our public schools, if we can, hopefully we will. And what does the future of public education look like in Texas in the next 70 years? And you got 2 minutes apiece too.
That's really long. That's a long time from now.
Anyone? I can start.
Yes.
I think one thing that's going really well is that teachers, educators, people in education, especially public education, are galvanizing in a way to react by getting more involved and organized. Because I even remember being a teacher myself. I started at 22 and I taught high school, and at no point in that education piece, and I was alt certified, did I learn how schools were funded, the school board, the impact. And so it wasn't until maybe the second or third year where I started to see, oh, this is how this works. This is what I need to pay attention to more, because I might be able to control a little bit with what I have, but ultimately some of these policies, things that are happening to me, I have to be active and part of that process. And so what I've seen, and just a lot of educators are now paying more attention. The lack of funding they're experiencing, which is impacting their effectiveness in class, the lack of resources, their pay. So I feel many educators and just people in the education system are saying, this is our time to really get involved and use this as an opportunity to really say, what are we going to do and how do we want education to look in the future? We actually have a voice. Many people didn't realize they have a voice in this, and they can actually impact and create that change. So I would say that's going well, and what it looks like in the future, if we continue really galvanizing from that energy that we currently have right now, more equity and people understanding how our own selves can be a barrier for our students, for our families, but also understanding how within education, seeing that our students, where these gaps are, that when we take equity into account, we start to shift the mindset, which is where we really want to create that change. We can build relationships, but sometimes our own mental mindsets can prohibit how those relationships look. And so there's really this conversation beginning on, and this appetite for how do we ensure that we're culturally responsive with our students, that we reach them and connect with them where they're at. And so I really would say that it is stating that our teachers are now being part of the conversation so that nothing's done to them, that we're being inclusive in their voices through this fight.
It took me a minute to think of something we're doing well. And that's because of all I see, right? But the one thing I will say that is going well in public education are our students. They are getting it right more times than they are getting it wrong. And you say what you want to say about young people, they also are galvanizing. And they are not allowing themselves to be treated as a thing. I taught for 25 years, but honestly, the first 15 years, I did not see students as people. I really didn't. That's not how we're taught. And so that's, like I said, I had to decolonize and do a lot of things to my teaching. But it was, I guess maybe when I moved from middle school to high school, and I really could see that they know what they want.
Yep.
They know what they're supposed to have. And they're not, at this point, they're really not going to accept less than. And that is sort of a conflict with adults sometimes. There's a tension there. We want them to be more independent, but do exactly what I say. Don't question what I say because I want you to do it. Well, you think you know what's best for you, but I really know what's best for you. So we can't have our cake and eat it too as adults. Trust me, I have a 15 and a 21-year-old. I have this tension all the time. But I really think that our students are doing what's best, and we are failing them at every turn. And I have, both my kids are Gen Z, and with all of this voting, I was really scared because I get the pulse from TikTok from my children, and they were like, Mom, it's bad out there. Like, everybody has given up. It's not good. And I had a sense of dread. Even talking about it right now, I'm getting goosebumps. I had a sense of dread of like, oh my gosh, what have we done? And then with the switch, she's like walking around talking about, did you just find my coconut tree or whatever? And I'm like, what? I didn't know where that was from. And I'm like, why do you keep saying that? And she's like, oh, it's a meme on TikTok and this, that, and the other. And it drew in my 15-year-old who can't even vote, right? But she started saying things and I'm like, wow, TikTok is actually doing its job this time. And so I really think that we have to give more credit to our youth. We have to listen to them because they are the closest to the problem. I think we had an opportunity and we missed it, and that was the pandemic. And they told us after the pandemic, this is what I need. This is what's going to help me grow. And we said, back to basics. It's going to do the same thing we've been doing, and we missed our opportunity. As the future goes, I think what we're going to see is public education is taking its last breaths. And if we don't breathe life back into it, we will all be attending that funeral. Yeah. There are too many people waiting to throw dirt in our face. They are spreading lies. They are forcing things that they know we can't fight against. They are literally nickel and diming us to death. Yeah. We can't pay teachers. There's school districts in Texas right now that are like, find your own way to school. Because we can't give you buses because we can't afford it. There are school districts that are saying, hey, we know we gave you free lunch for the last 10 years, but now we can't afford it. Yeah. And our kids are watching us. Yeah. And they are going to give up on us, and they are going to give up on this institution if we don't do something different. And so as we move into October and November, talk to your grandchildren, talk to your children, talk to your teens, talk to all of those people, because some of them are still disenfranchised and they are not getting it. And when you vote, don't say, yeah, I'm going to go vote. Say, hey, you know what? I'm going to ensure your future. I'll be back. Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, to kind of add on that, I think, what happens in the next couple years is going to have a really impact on the next 70. These fights that we're having around vouchers are directly tied to Brown versus Board of Education. The very first voucher bill came in 1955 as a way to get away from desegregation. Yeah. And it is a fight that we're going to continue to have. And vouchers, they promise the sun and the moon and the stars, but it is not that. It is choice for schools, not for families. Schools get to decide what the tuition is. The voucher will never cover the tuition. They can discriminate on anything they want. You lose your civil rights around disability, special education, all of those issues. And if they succeed in passing these vouchers, it is going to be one of the nails in that coffin for the end of public education. And yet teachers who are not qualified, just all of the, and they promise these kids that they're going to rescue them from failing schools. And as we've heard Trustee Hunter say over and over again, our schools are not failing. It is our elected officials. It is our legislature. They are drowning our public education system in a bathtub and saying that it's failing so that they can push these vouchers. And they've been withholding funds. There was over $4 billion in the budget appropriated for public education that was never allocated because they held it hostage for vouchers, and they didn't get it last session. They're coming back with it this session, and this is the pathway towards destroying public education. If we had more time, I'd talk about the tax cuts that are going to defund our schools. That is part of the two-pronged approach. But there is a lot of work and effort going to destabilizing and destroying public education happening at the Capitol building. And what happens next session is going to have a huge impact on what happens the next 70 years.
Absolutely. Very, very quickly, I think that the next 2 months is really the ball game. Our young people, what is good about the transformation that's happened since July and Kamala Harris being the nominee is symbolically, in so many ways, extraordinary ways, she's representative of multiracial democracy. And so she's galvanized people, she's inspired so many people in a way that we haven't seen since Barack Obama in 2008. And also, I think this election has provided a public civic education for tens of millions of people. Hopefully, we'll see in November 5th if we get a bigger turnout than 2020. That was 81 million to 74 million, 155 million. That was the most popular votes in American history. The ball game is going to be the next election. The ball game is going to be the next election because if Donald Trump wins that next election, if the GOP has control of Congress, public education as we know it in the United States, especially post-World War II public education, what Lyndon Johnson was able to accomplish with the Elementary Secondary Education Act in 1965 is over. That's going to be over. That chapter will have concluded. You've got a candidate who's already saying that they're going to shutter the Department of Education. And that is all, when you think about Betsy DeVos and what happened, that is all because there's about $15 billion per year that they want to give away to their rich oligarch friends. That's the ball game. Nobody would be trying to, and certainly specific states, like Chandra just said, are also utilizing state money, red states that was supposed to be earmarked. And again, this is why I just keep coming back to Reconstruction, because this is all, the only reason we have public education is because of black elected officials during Reconstruction. South Carolina was the model, and that's why Thomas Miller, the black congressman who's then ousted, he's at the 1896 convention saying we were 8 years in power and we fixed up the levees, we created the public schools, we created almshouses, which is anti-poverty, and now you're gonna make sure we don't vote forever and ever, right? So everything that we're facing is connected to that original sin of not just racial slavery, but remember, 200,000 black people fought in the Civil War. This is all stuff they don't teach white folks, they don't teach anybody in this country. They say somehow Lincoln freed black people who were enslaved. That is a massive, massive lie. And it's a purposeful lie to not say that black people self-emancipated themselves. And not on top of that, they actually created a new framework for multiracial democracy. They didn't want people to know that in the 19th century because there were Barack and Michelle Obamas in the 19th century who could have run this country then too, right? And so we are faced with such an onslaught of violence, right? And it's not just physical violence. It is cultural, economic, existential, spiritual violence. That's why we are in a state of moral decay as a society, and not a cheap morality of who's dating who. I'm talking about a society that doesn't care about children, that doesn't care about human beings, that wants to see them injured and hurt and terrorized because they don't look like them. They don't look like they're supposed to look. That's what we are facing. Is everybody still with me? That's what we're facing, right? And so the opportunity, though, in the next 2 months is to tell our young people there is an aspirational democracy. And that's the democracy of Ella Baker and Fannie Lou Hamer. That's the democracy of Martin King. That's the democracy of John Lewis. That's the democracy of Diane Nash. That's the democracy of Barbara Jordan. It's to tell them that we can actually achieve a different America for the first time. We're not after a restoration because we keep lying to ourselves about our past. We don't have a past that is good enough to restore, right? We're trying to become better, for the first time. And young people can see through our lies, whether they're our children or not. They can see through our lives. Dr. King called it a world house because we are all imbricated and mixed in it together, right? That's why King says the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. But we have to make it bend towards justice. We're out of time.
Awesome discussion, right on time. I do want to open it up for a couple of audience questions. Ham, since you have video?
If we have audience questions, I would like people to use this microphone over here.
Oh, he's got a plan. Oh, you were great. I loved everything you said. Yeah.
Is Ernie first?
No, I know. It's been, I mean, and with us, like I said, and somebody said black families are tired. We've been working so hard. It's hard.
I'm appalled by this device, by the way. There is something I want to say to us who are here and in the audience, but also on the panel. We've heard about these tax deferrals, and I'm looking around, and most of us are, quote unquote, the middle age or the seniors, and we own our homes and we have accounts and we may own businesses. Be aware that those tax breaks are temporary. They are not forever. So it is to pull you in, to get you to agree with something that in the long term is going to be far more damaging to us, and therefore to our children and our grandchildren. Because as we age, can anyone here say, don't answer, it's a rhetorical, that as taxes increase and your income decreases, that you can afford to maintain your standard of living?
It's true. She's really.
Second row?
I just wanted to add a positive comment on what I think, at least I'm only familiar with Austin ISD, of what you're doing well, and that's involving the whole community through mentor programs. I'm particularly familiar with Breakthrough Central Texas and Austin Partners in Education, tutors for the students. Just the more we can all get involved in helping our children, the better we're doing, I think.
Can you hold it like
Okay. This might be off topic, and if it is, you can throw it out. But I think I heard Native Americans mentioned a couple times, but do you see any, not special, but is there anything unique to educating Native Americans in our educational system as opposed to other groups?
Can you be more specific? What do you mean unique? in
Well,
educating?
maybe not unique, and it doesn't affect us a whole lot here in Texas because we don't have reservations here in Texas. We do? That have schools on them?
Oh, well, the kids are transferred out.
Yeah.
They're not
Yeah.
educated in their community.
So I guess it's a population we don't hear about a lot, and they don't seem to be, well, I shouldn't say that. We now have some Native Americans who are who were appointed it was with Joe Biden. But I guess I'm just wondering, because it seems like I hear a lot about the plight of Native Americans and not being educated and not having opportunities. And I just wonder, are they falling through? Are they not being addressed in our systems? I'm just curious, really, because you're the experts and I'm not.
So I can only speak to my district. The data is there, and anytime we pull a report or have a progress monitoring, if the percentage is high enough, and it usually has to be somewhere between like 11 and 13 kids. But Austin does have a significant Native population, because what you're thinking of generally is Native, and you're thinking larger tribes, but we have our tribes that are coming from Mexico, so our Indios. So they are considered Native Americans also. So they will be Hispanic, and instead of marking Hispanic or Hispanic non-white, they will mark Native American. So if you look at any data for AISD, you should be able to see where those students are. But as far as like there being a significant number, for me to be able to say right now, yes, they're middle of the road, I wouldn't be able to tell you. A lot of that's gonna have to do with socioeconomic status, and I can just pretty much tell you if they are experiencing poverty, then no, they're not doing well. If they're middle class, it depends. They may or may not be doing well. If they are affluent, they may be doing better.
Are you speaking of just Austin or Native American First Nation students throughout?
educated
on
reservation schools.
Are there any other questions?
Thank you.
We have two up front.
Purple.
Hi. Candace, you mentioned a number of ways that we are failing our students, in particular in math, and how do we fix that?
Real quick, just let me hip y'all to something real quick. Everybody is suffering in math. I hear this all the time. African American kids are suffering in math. Hispanic children, students who receive special education services, everyone is doing horribly in math. Go stand outside Huntington in the Link. Go stand outside Kumon in Mueller. Go stand out wherever, and you're gonna see all these little bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, middle-class, rich white kids getting that support. Everybody's doing bad in math. There's something fundamentally wrong with the way we're teaching math. I'm a history teacher, not a math teacher, but we missed our opportunity. The kids already told us they're suffering in math. And so I was with the people that started the algebra project today, and I've been with them multiple times. They've kind of figured it out. But again, a shocker, there's too much money to be made in a broke system, right? If you fix it, I can't have tutoring. If you fix it, then I won't get that grant. If you fix it, I won't be able to. So honestly, there's too much money to be made in a broke system. We know what's wrong. We really just don't want to fix it.
I'll share two. One of the initiatives that we've seen, we're trying to increase advanced academics, more representation of students in advanced academics. So one of our initiatives is through 5th and 6th grade. So students have to opt out versus opting in based on their scores. We see that students of color display some of the same level of scoring that their white counterparts have, and so we want to ensure that those students are enrolled in advanced academics and math. So we started that through 5th and 6th grade and have been working this summer to have more targeted instruction to prepare the students, but we can't just prepare the students, we also have to prepare the teachers for what an advanced academic student might look like, right? Because they may think in their head it looks like this, comes from this socioeconomic status. They need to be able to have this or that. But when we think about it, even students at Harvard have tutoring. So, right? And so our students need supports as well. And what that looks like is going to be different from each student group. But we have students who display other skills beyond academics that show that they have the perseverance, the resilience to be in those classes and push through and perform well. And even if it's just the exposure to being in a college level class or advanced academics, even if they don't take the AP exam, that then really builds up their skill set, their confidence. So whenever they do go on to post-secondary, and there's a lot of research around math that shows that if they are on that track, there are more opportunities for students. And so math is an area that we're trying to focus more on and earlier versus waiting until closing those gaps as students get older. We look at the 8th grade data and senior data that we have more black and brown students who are seniors who are operating on an 8th grade math level. So huge gaps as we're sending our students to be future ready and perform in whatever avenue or opportunity path they choose. But we as public education should make sure that they're ready beyond for whatever they decide. If they want to decide college, or if later on they change their mind and want to decide something else, whatever they do decide their pathway, they are prepared.
And Round Rock has been a leader on that, and
Yes.
it's finally getting on board. But there were kids performing in the top quartile in their math assessment in 5th grade who were not taking advanced coursework in 6th grade. And so, like, those kids, you might say they're failing at math, but, you know, you're sort of like, but if you put them in a course that they were challenged in, they would be performing a lot better. So sometimes it might be kids don't know the skills, and sometimes we're not putting kids in classes that are actually challenging them to the point where they can demonstrate the skills that they have or learn the math content because they've demonstrated they have the skills to do so, but haven't been exposed to the content yet.
Right.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
No,
but
no.
I just want to say, Round Rock
Absolutely.
has killed it, because as soon as y'all got shown the data, well, I mean, you were like, okay, well, why don't we just have everybody who's in the top quartile automatically go into a more advanced course, you know?
Which is what Round Rock, on a national level, if you pick up best schools in Texas, Round Rock always rises to the top. So thank you.
Yeah, right.
Westwood comes in
So there's a comment and a question. First of all, I just want to thank our panelists because you guys are amazing and you're actually doing the work. And so thank you for being courageous enough to stand up and actually do the work. So for us we're kind of sitting here, how do we help in addition to vote? How do we help and support? What are some action steps? Because I think Ms. Hunter hit the nail on the head when you said it's the leadership. You can't come back with the same data and say, yeah, we have the problem over again and continue to do the same thing and expect different results. Of course, the leadership at Round Rock is amazing, and it's reflecting on that, right? And they're having some amazing changes, which Karen Gray is now the chief of that office, and congratulations to you for that. So what do you need us to do to help the fight?
I think, you know, for me, I always go back to the legislature because I'm a lobbyist and that's where I spend all my time. But you don't stop at voting when it comes to political engagement. You need to build relationships with your elected officials in their district offices. Here in Austin, we're lucky because, you know, our district offices are the capital. Our legislators are very accessible. But tell that to your friends in other parts of the state as well. They need to visit the district offices, and you need to be inviting your legislators to your schools to witness your programs, to see what's actually happening, because too many of our legislators don't know what's happening in public education. They're hearing lies, they're spreading misinformation, but also elected officials have huge egos. They love being the center of attention. They love being invited to schools and, you know, doing the photo ops and meeting the kids and going into the classrooms. And it does change hearts and minds. You need to not put your legislators and elected officials on a pedestal. You need to invite them into the community and hold them accountable by building those relationships with their offices and inviting them into your schools and into your programs to see what is actually happening. All of these good things that we've heard about what's happening in public education, our elected officials need to see that so they stop spreading misinformation and saying our schools are failing, because when they see what's actually happening inside those buildings, it's not what we're hearing in the media. It's not the misinformation that they're spouting in these voucher hearings. Our schools are doing amazing things with a very, you know, tight financial situation.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, that's going to wrap up our conversation today. I do want to close us out with a couple of closing remarks. I want to invite Carol, who's with the League. She works with our candidate night, and she has some quick election updates that she wants to share with us this afternoon.
Well, it just pivots off of what these people have been saying for a couple of hours, is getting involved in the process of leadership and electing leaders. We have the privilege here in the Austin League of Women Voters to work with the City of Austin Ethics Review Commission, who works with all of their candidates. We are invited every year to host and moderate and create questions for the candidate forums. And part of the Fair Finance Act, they have to be part of this moderated forum by us in order to get the fair finance money from the City of Austin. That is one of the requirements. And we are privileged and honored to be able to do that. I'm looking for volunteers. We have it on the website. The first one is this Thursday. It's District 7. And then we go every couple of weeks. We have it all the way up and through the second week of October. But this is put on by the City of Austin. They take care of everything. They set the dates. It's at city facilities, ADA compliant, public transportation. They take care of that. We create the questions and moderate, and the idea is to educate the voters, just everything that's going on. I wish we did more with the school districts. We have in the past. But it's to educate the voters through the questions, and we formulate those questions. So I'm available afterwards if you want to ask me about it. I'm in the back over here by the cookies. Take some cookies. But
Thank you so much, Carol. And we're going to close this afternoon out with our president of the Austin chapter of League of Women Voters. Excuse me, I'm getting tongue-tied. Jessica Foreman.
All right. Thank you. First off, big thank you to our panelists, the first panel, for all of your personal stories. Thank you. The second panel for all your deep expertise in work, dismantling systems of oppression. Thank you so much. And let's give them a round of applause too. Also, a big thank you to the volunteers who are here, who set up the room and who are at the back. Yes. And I kept hearing the word galvanize, so that reminded me of something. You know, Sheba Washington is a relatively new member of our organization, and I had a conversation with her this year, just in January, about how she was passionate about public education, and she wanted to shine a spotlight on what is happening in Texas. 6 months later, we have this event. I would say that is a good use of the word galvanize. So one thing I would like to speak to is those of you that are League of Women Voters members in the room. You know, if you are like me and you have the privilege of time, and you have the privilege of resources, and you have the privilege of safety, not everybody has the privilege of safety in the civic space, then now is the time to kind of put our actions and money and time where our mouth is. We are in what is the League of Women Voters Super Bowl Sunday in the next 3 months. And so join us in September as we are registering thousands of voters across the city. You can take some training and go into high schools and tell them how they can get registered with Susanna. You can register at the movie theater. You can register voters all kinds of places. And when that registration deadline hits, we're going to immediately pivot to get out the vote and combat misinformation, which is already coming out. And then in November, we're going to pivot to, if we need to, election protection. Okay. And then in January, we're going to join the State League, where we'll be at the Capitol. We are nonpartisan. That means we don't support parties or candidates, but we absolutely do support issues. We do advocate for the John Lewis Voting Rights Act at the national level, and we will be at the state. We want to be in everyone's hair. That's like my mom's term, right? And so we want to fight bills that take away freedom of speech from our educators and from our students, take away women's rights, and we want voting rights, which is another thing. So join us in all of those things. We look forward to it. And thank you all so much for coming. Let's do one final round of applause, and we'll see you later. Please take some cookies with you as you head out.